the longer you go without getting that product into customers' hands in a real environment, not just kind of poking around on it, the further away you're getting from what you need to build. And so that first bit of usable code is extremely important.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 213, Unlocking the Secrets to a Successful Product Launch. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, how much do you enjoy testing?
Zero. None. Now, whether you ask me how much should I test, that's a different question. But enjoying? Come on. I enjoy having lunch at Saturday with my family, type of stuff, or playing sports, or listening to music. That's what I enjoy. I don't enjoy testing. Nobody does.
But should they? That's the question today. Today we have Mav Turner on from Tricentis. Mav, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
So recently Mav became CTO of DevOps at Tricentis, but prior to that, he has been in the product world. So we're going to talk about, as much as we can talk about Tricentis, but even at a higher level because of Mav's heritage, how does he approach building a product? What are the decisions that are made? And sometimes how we disconnect from the strategy as developers. Because I know I sometimes do. It's like, wait, I'm sitting here coding away, tap, 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 tap. Wait, what's the strategy again?
Yeah, what was it that I was doing for a month? I already forgot.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Mav, I know your developers at Tricentis never have that problem, right?
Oh, of course. No, they all know every day, every hour of what they're doing, how that directly connects to the business and our customers. Of course. That's not true. That's something that we try to improve every day, but I know that there's gaps there. And that's where I constantly try to solve that. But I know that at best, maybe I'm doing okay trying to close that gap.
Well, what are some of those gaps? Or if you can name one or two, it's like, what's the big pain point you have right now in 2023?
So when I think about closing gaps, I think about the communication gap. So are your teams distributed? We have a lot of sites around the world. We have sites in Israel and Austria and the Czech Republic. We have developers in the US and Australia, India, a very global team. So one of it is just a basic communication gap, right? But even further than that, I think it's how does this product and it's where it's going, the features I'm working on, how do those actually move the business forward? But really, developers don't really say that. Really, what they say to me is, "Why does this matter? Why shouldn't I be doing this other cool feature, right? And how does what I'm doing actually help this end customer?" And I think when we don't have that customer in the picture, and the developers are too disconnected from that end user, that's when you really quickly start to create these fault lines, these gaps, and these greater distances between the developer and what they're doing every day and the ultimate business results.
Keeping the customer close to the company is a big deal. But usually when we hear that, we're just talking maybe support, maybe customer success, and engineering might be 6 steps away. How should people be solving for that?
There's a couple of things that I've seen work. Again, I'm not claiming that we're best in industry here. There's a lot of improvement I'd like to do. Some of it is as simple as sharing information. One of the things we've done recently is make sure that when we close a new deal, that information, new customer comes in, they buy the product. Why did they buy the product? What's the thing that made them successful? Were they able to self-serve? Did they require a lot of engagement from a technical resource? And making sure that information flows to the product team, whether that's PM, engineering, developers, testers, designers, right? What's that customer experiencing, that prospect earlier on in the cycle? And you mentioned earlier support. When we have issues, how do we ensure that those issues get raised up with the team and they're aware of them. One of the things we're experimenting with a new product that we just launched in the fall, which I can talk more about. Of course, I'd love to talk more about. But the important thing is we've actually enabled intercom in the product. Now, who typically answers in product questions? So if a salesperson and a prospect has a question, if a support, who usually answers that question?
Usually the person that you don't need to be having answer that question.
Yeah, right. So one of the things, particularly for a new product, that's we're still learning a lot. We're actually having the product team, so the developers, the testers, the PM, spend some of their time fielding those questions and because it's not just yes, we want to help the customer be successful, but the learning from that exchange is super valuable. And for us, this is an experiment. This is not our standard motion across the business, but it's something where we've said, how can we bring that voice of the customer closer into the development team? This is the most literal way we can do that here. It's probably not going to be sustainable. If I fast forward 3 years, we probably still can't have the team spending most of the time that doing that, particularly if we meet our financial projections and goals that we want to deliver on. But for an early stage product, when there's still so much more to learn, I think it's going to be really valuable.
And maybe worth rotating people through even after you've hit all your numbers.
Right. Yeah, you're right. That's the dangers. Okay, great. Hey, that was a great experiment. 3 months. We've kind of got on traction, and then the team goes back into day-to-day build land, and they disconnect from the customer. We have to avoid that trap. That's a very easy trap to fall into.
One thing I'm interested in, this is purely for my personal benefit because I don't have the answer. Is there a way, because everybody speaks about, capturing the feedback from customers or prospects. How to capture the feedback of those who turned away before we capture them in a way, right? Because there might be a person who visited the website and would be an ideal customer, but for some reason he said, no, this is not for me, then maybe messaging is wrong, right? Or did a self-managed demo without really involving anybody from whatever the pattern is, right? But it's a puzzle. I don't know how to answer that question. How do you capture feedback from people you don't know who they are?
Great question. I don't have a magic answer for that, but I'll tell you how I think about it and how we try to solve it, because solve it's the wrong word, but how we try to improve is probably a better way to say that, right? How do we constantly get better at getting signals and feedback from people that we think should be talking to? Like, hey, if you only knew about our product, right? This is all what marketing is almost entirely about. There's a couple of different research ways. So one of the things, in addition to the engineering team and product team, the UX team that I run is a key part of their job, right? Understanding, doing their UX research, trying to find these folks. And there's a couple of tools to try to find, target personas. But really, I think the answer is in iteration. And you mentioned, I'm going to pick on this example, even though it's probably not fair. You mentioned the website, right? Somebody comes to the website and they bounce. Somebody comes to the website, they click 3 or 20 different links, and then they leave. And I think if you're not engaged in that full cycle, and this is a benefit I think a lot of early stage and startup companies have, because there's much less ground area to cover. You can see how many people are interacting there. We're seeing a lot of companies put chat and conversational dialogue on their website. To be perfectly honest, I never engage with those when I'm browsing around a website. I mean, it pops up and the first thing is just to click it to get out of the way. But that's the example. What we're trying to do is pulling that analytics and that qualitative data into that conversation to better understand what's working and what's not. A/B testing, multivariate testing, in order to see how we get there. But that one person, if you've got scale, that one person shows up, they disappear. Sure, you could cookie them, try to chase them around the internet with ads and other things, but that's probably not going to be any more successful than when they showed up at your site the first time, right? So that's not an answer, that's a response.
I'm curious, can you track when somebody actually closes that box off intercom? I can't remember.
I believe, yes. I believe that's an action activity event that gets captured for that user. And then you persist that setting. Different platforms have different options, of course, but in general, I think most of them do support that.
Okay. Regardless, that's a completely useless piece of information.
I'm so grateful that you said that.
Can you track that?
Until you said that, I thought, hey, there must be something wrong with me, because everybody puts the chat box. I always close it. If everybody puts it, I must be the only one who is closing it. Otherwise, not everybody would put it. But so there's 2 of us. Cool.
Yeah, it sounds like three. Yeah, we do get questions. Typically, I see them more valuable later in the funnel than that top of funnel. First time I've ever gone to this website, I'm looking at the website. I don't want to have a conversation with anybody. Existing customer, I want to look for support. I'm in a sales cycle. I have a pricing question. Sure, but top of funnel, first couple of visits to the scenario you're describing about trying to make sure we don't lose that person who should be the person we're talking to. No, we all close. Oh, our N of three here, but yes.
Okay. We've talked about marketing and go to market way too much because that's a part of things that we like to nerd out on just a hair. But a lot of people listening might be checking out. So let's get over to the stuff that people may want to care about. So as a product owner, because effectively, even in your role today, you're still owning product, correct?
Correct.
In some way, shape, or form. So
Yep.
What does it look like for a vendor today? And this is just your scope, but you've worked in other places before. When you're starting to create a product that you're thinking is going to go to market, and let's assume for a moment you've already proven that you've done your test, you've got sign off, you got some people willing to pay you. Now you're ready to build. How are you building products today?
Good question. So the good thing is we have a couple of different products that we've been building recently, so I can give you a few good scenarios, and they're different styles, right? Because there's no, again, one simple way. I was afraid at first when you asked if I was a product owner, we were going to get into semantic debate about agile team roles. So I'm glad we.
Oh, please. No.
Um,
You just said the worst A word that exists on the planet.
That's what I was afraid. So I was glad you took it to the building new products. So when you say product owner, that triggers me immediately, which is why. So yes, what do we think about how we build new products? So we got a business case. We've done the research to validate that that's interesting. Great. Hopefully at that stage, and this is true of some, but not all of our products. So just again, we're not perfect. Not trying to claim we are. We've already had a prototype, and that customer research is not simply, hey, if we built this thing, would you buy it? Because that's not largely useful research to inform a decision. People aren't really good at predicting the future, particularly even with their own behaviors, actually, right? So hopefully we've got a prototype that people are actively using. We've had some example of this with some of our service virtualization technology that we've had for a while that's been really successful, that we actually did a good job of the POC and just the prototyping in general before the business case. So that's something at Tricentis that we've actually, our technology research stage has been very strong historically, but connecting back the business case and taking that interesting idea and bringing it to market is where we've really focused in the last year, 12 to 18 months. So getting that usable prototype, having people actually use it, and then tell you, I really want to buy this. Why can't I buy this? So that's the ideal way from my perspective, is to actually have the working code, have it in that user's environment, have them pulling you into that direction. And then it's a conversation around pricing strategy and execution. If you haven't done that, and if you've done okay, we built our business case, we have market research to make us believe this, now let's start from ground zero and go build this product. I think one of the things that we see a lot is, okay, team formation. If you're a large company, is this going on top of an existing platform? Is this going to be on scratch, built from scratch? My goal always, and this is pretty common, I don't think I'm going to surprise anybody with this, is to narrow it down as much as possible. That feature slicing, it's very, very easy to expand the product. And all of a sudden, this idea that you could get maybe a .1 out at least in months ends up taking a year, and you put a lot of bodies on it. The longer you go without getting that product in a customer's hands in a real environment, not just kind of poking around on it, the further away you're getting from what you need to build. And so that first bit of usable code is extremely important. Again, it's going to depend on, are you adding a feature or a new product add-on to an existing product platform, or are you building a product from scratch? And we can talk about either kind of those details and how that changes the process and steps. But those I view those as very different worlds. But within the premise of time to value, getting the customer, and the value is the customer getting value from it, not you internally hitting some random feature list that you thought would be important to build 2 years ago when you first built the business case.
It's interesting you bring that up. Business case was built 2 years ago, and now I'm just getting around to getting something in their hands. In today's world, that seems to be 20 months too long.
I think that's a very accurate number. But if you went and surveyed most software companies, so we could talk about the ideals, which I agree upon. what do you, I mean, your listeners, do you think they've idea business case gets reviewed in a couple of weeks and then a couple of months later they've got working code in production?
No.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare. And what's interesting is you're bringing up the greenfield brand new product versus adding on a new feature to an existing part of a platform, if you want to call it that. When you're building today, so let me sort of veer off the road here just a little bit. When you're building today, do you still think, or does your engineering team still think monolith or microservices?
Good question.
Just high level, because not everything needs to be a microservice.
True. I would say if we're having an architectural discussion and theory, everybody talks about microservices, and you look at what people actually build, they tend to revert generally. Again, there's always exceptions and there's folks on either end, but I have found that more often than not, people tend to take a more monolithic app approach. I do agree there are some scenarios where that is appropriate. However, one of the things that particularly in larger organizations that you find is the dependency situations, the dependency troubles, right? Okay, great. We're all gonna build this. Well, this team's gonna do that. This team's gonna do this. That team could be reporting to the same manager. I'm gonna get into Conway's law, but reporting to the same manager. That could be in a different function. It could be a business system versus the technology you're trying to build. And the teams that tend to take a more microservices architecture approach and kind of narrow down what this thing needs to be will be more successful. But generally speaking, when I talk with our customers, I won't even talk about internally. When I talk with customers, most have not matured with their deployment patterns to really understand that. And it comes down to a personality preference for the architecture versus what I would argue is good engineering discipline around the rational. It's actually the same argument around cloud versus on-prem, right? Cloud. I mean, I think we're starting to see a little bit of rationalization there as opposed to some of the hype before, but I think it's actually the same type of argument.
Let me give you a magic wand.
I use this one all the time. It doesn't work. I keep trying new ones. But
I can give you a new one.
I'm
giving you a new one because the one you're obviously isn't working right now. You have it, and as part of your organization, how do you hire today? Right? Who are you hiring? What skill sets do they have? Because, okay, legit, you're CTO today. Unlike product where you were just dealing with maybe PMM and product owners and whatever, now you're higher level. Who are you trying to hire today? Because you want to get that 24-month bounce that we were just talking about earlier down to 4 months.
So I will kind of answer your question, and I'll take it a different way. In general, my job is to manage and lead a team, right? So my goal is to make sure that all of my leaders are in the right spot and that they're hiring the right people below them. And so I'm fortunate I was able to kind of set up the team when we did our reorg and this new kind of focus that we've got to set up that team from mostly existing folks that I knew would be successful in their roles. But the reason I say I'm cheating in it, but I want to actually kind of peel this onion back a little bit, is that team element is super important. I'm a really big fan of strengths and weaknesses. I don't need everybody to be great at everything. I need that team collectively to be great at the mission they have. And so what I mean by that is today, if we look at what we're trying to accomplish with this business at Tricentis, we call it our DevOps business. We're trying to drive a more product-led growth, high velocity, very tight time to value. I mentioned earlier the experiment about having these engineering teams that are directly answering customer questions, which is not a normal, if I hired most developers and say, hey, 20% of your time, you're going to be helping customers with support issues. That's not going to appeal to most developers, right? Just to be perfectly frank. And so when I'm looking at the different parts of my whole business and I'm thinking about the different products, the team I need for the different missions changes. And my leadership team is the most important thing, because if I can't trust them, which is another back to your what do I look for? And part of that is trust. And I default to trust for better or worse, and then let you disprove me for most of my folks. If I can't trust them to lead their teams and to execute their mission, then our business cannot grow. So I want to trust but verify, inspect the team, what they're doing. But if I am in daily stand-ups, for example, then I'm failing and I'm not trusting my leaders. I need to be able to see whatever, and even the small org that I've got today, there's a couple of different processes that the teams are using and ceremonies and artifacts and or lack thereof. And that's okay. My goal is to look to my engineering leaders, my VPs, directors, and say, this is the mission, this is what I need you to accomplish, and I need to understand how you're progressing towards that goal and make sure that that information and those dialogues are occurring so I have the confidence without disrupting their work. I'm a little bit on a tangent here, so I'll come back to your actual question about hiring, if I can. But that's important. So teams, how I manage teams, how you think about these teams, and how they play off of each other, and knowing the specific mission, product. Again, is it new product? Is it an existing established product? Existing revenue? No revenue? So I've got different leaders and with different strengths going in those different roles. From a hiring perspective, I mentioned earlier, trust is a key thing for me, which is very difficult to suss out in a hiring process. Here's an example. I have a chief architect that works for me that was in the organization before as an architect, and he was somebody that I felt could do a lot more than in his role. And so I didn't hire him externally, but I was able to move him to a different role in the organization that better matched our needs and his skill sets, right? And so right people, right place philosophy. So I guess this long diatribe here really boils down to understanding what it is you're asking this person to do. New product, existing product, large existing team, different persona than somebody that's going to say, hey, you have to be comfortable with not defined, ill-defined processes, ill-defined customer market, right? And knowing, and I would actually say to your listeners, know which one of those you enjoy and feel challenged in a positive way, because I interview people all the time for not only roles on my team but other roles. And my main philosophy on hiring is I'm going to tell you the full story, which is the good and the bad. So I'm not trying to scare you away from this job, but if what I've described does not sound fun to you, then do not take this job. And you won't hurt my feelings. That's okay. But you want to find a different role for you. So for example, we're still very much in the early storming stage of this new business that we've established. And for some people that may not be comfortable, right? They may want the steady, I know what I need to do every day. I don't want that to change as rapidly. I'd rather have a 6-month project where I can build and build something bigger. And that's not a bad thing. But knowing what it is, where it is that you want to be and where you thrive is super important when you're interviewing for a job. And don't be afraid to say, this doesn't sound like the right role. So that's probably, after that long conversation, really to answer your question, I try to scare people with the truth, make sure they know what they're getting into, and challenge them to say, is this really what you want to do? Or do you want to do this other thing? And that usually works pretty well.
I guess that also applies to the future in terms of now you're in whatever the stage is, let's say early stage, maybe more chaotic. You need people who can actually deal with that environment, whatever the environment is. And then you're working towards a certain goal, among other things, changing the processes and what's not. And then I'm guessing 2 years from now, you might say, okay, now you're not a good fit anymore because we are different and you were a good fit for what we were trying to do back then, in a way, right?
Yeah, Victor, that's a great point. Like the people that, and sometimes that's hard if you grow with an organization. You may start an organization that was very small and it's grown. Now, generally, my view is if an organization is growing, while the role that you are in currently or the role that you started in may no longer be the role that you best associate and identify with, there's likely another role in that organization that is a better fit. So usually, again, you're in the early stage, you like a little bit of that chaos, then it kind of normalizes and stabilizes over several years. And now you're not as interested in that day-to-day role because you kind of thrive on that. There's probably somewhere in your organization where they're trying to innovate and they're trying to build something new. But it's always really hard. I mean, I've worked with people that have worked on the same product for decades and they like it, right? And then I've had some tell me, if you ever take me off this product, I'm going to quit because I might as well go work somewhere else, even though they maybe have the same technology and shared services and similar teams. They get really attached to that. Sometimes that can work, but honestly, I think that's important to understand is, yes, the team that I have today that's building some of my newer products, they're going to get bored in 2 years, if not before then, if they're kind of moving in from that early development stage of the process to now, a more mature product. My day to day is different, and my goal as a leader is to make sure that I've got, again, the right people in the right place. Great, now we've got this new initiative. Can they go help us over here? And we've got people who prefer that more mature, stable product. And honestly, site strategy comes into play with that very well too, because different locations tend to have strengths and weaknesses, and building new things versus engineering at scale or maintaining, right? And so you get a lot of variation there. Of course, there's always exceptions in all of those, but I do find that different regions around the world have different strengths at those different stages, and that can play a key part in it.
That can apply, I guess, on all levels. I have few examples, which I'm not going to name, of companies who had, let's say, top level, right? Amazing CEO, leadership, CEO, kind of the perfect person that takes the company from 0 to, I don't know, 500 people, and then it fails completely. And I have a theory that that's sometimes because not only that person cannot let go of others, but kind of that person cannot let go of the new role, right? I mean, it's still called the same, right? I'm still CEO, CTO, director, whatever, but this is now something completely different. It almost sounds like I'm a failure if I actually say now this is not me anymore, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic about what do founders, and whether they're the CEO or just founder, frankly, founders do in an acquisition. So I've done a lot of acquisitions, and this problem never gets easier, to be honest. The easiest indicator to success here that I've seen is the more experienced that founder is, the more times they've done it, the easier it is on the company that's acquiring, because usually the founder comes in, they know they get the process right, and usually the reality is, if they're successful at that stage, they don't want to be at a larger company. They want that ownership and that flexibility at that early stage, and those are almost the most extreme of that persona we're talking about. And so finding a way, okay, how can we make sure that this is successful in that time, and then I'll just be mature about, okay, and then they're ready for their next stage. And that's not a bad thing, right? That doesn't mean that everybody has to leave. It doesn't mean that things aren't going to be successful. It's just recognizing where that person's going to be able to add the most value. And often it's hard for that person to add value. The smaller the company becomes, all the way to the larger the company, right? The greater that discrepancy, the harder it is for that person to find a spot. There are absolutely people out there that are able to find that niche and that can be the founder and grow their companies to be massive. But the vast majority of us are, the humans here. We typically are have a little sweet spot that we're really good at and that we enjoy, and we quickly find that that's not as exciting when that changes. But again, like that whole topic of acquisitions and company founding and kind of growing out is a whole topic in of itself. And I've talked to a lot of different VCs and folks that will ask me to give feedback on the founder or CEO before they put money in, and they'll say, is this person going to be okay when we get to 1 million, 10 million, 50 million, wherever their revenue goals are, with stepping back? And that's an important understanding, whether that's a formal seed to series A, B, or C, or whether that's a less formal side. But like I said, that maybe we can come back and talk just about that one topic in itself, because that's a very interesting one.
We could probably spend a couple of hours talking about the one thing of the founder that doesn't want to let go.
Yeah.
To be honest, it's your baby, right? I wouldn't want to let go. I'm not saying that I would. It's hard. I just built this, right?
Yeah, you've invested more than anybody else ever will. Not only has, and so I don't blame. Like it's not the evil founder persona I'm mad at. It's a business reality that exists.
So you were talking earlier about a new product that you said maybe we could come back to that. Let's talk about that, but let's first talk. So you can talk about it in general, but then let's talk about sort of the nerdy details of, we've talked about, okay, who do you hire? Who do you get on the mission? How are you playing that out? Of course, as much as you can say about it.
So one of the things that we were looking at, so there's a new product. We actually have launched 3 new products at Tricentis in the last 6 months approximately. And each had its own story. The one that I was referring to earlier is a Atlassian Marketplace plugin. Okay, and it's built on their Forge platform. So there's a lot of good things about building on somebody else's platform, and there's a lot of things that are hard. From a UI perspective, it looks and feels like a native Jira feature, frankly, because we just enable it. It's there. The buttons, you don't have to go do a bunch of design. Again, those constraints are helpful. Sometimes they're frustrating because somebody wants to do something they can't. And we have to constantly look at the architecture on the back end to say, where is this data living? If it lives there in the Forge platform, what can we do with it? Where are we restricted to? How do we optimize load times, right? Can we optimize load times, right? You're constrained on what you can do in the platform versus if we own some of the data, what we can do. For example, this is kind of a very specific example there. But building that on their platform has allowed us to move very quickly and allowed us to build a really great product. It's constrained us on the pricing. It constrains us on how we can market it. It constrains us on the features that we can build and where we can eventually take the product. But we think that it's been very worth the, again, kind of I overuse the word experiment, worth the experiment of building it there, because while we've had other plugins and content in the Atlassian marketplace, this is going to be we have already launched it, our first actual plugin that's been built on their platform. And like I said, it's got a lot of advantages and benefits because we've done that, but it's been a learning curve, right? Because none of our developers had ever done that before. They had pretty decent documentation, some gaps, some inaccurate documentation, as usually happens, even if it was internal platform or external. But ultimately, we've been able to deliver very, very quickly. And then now, as we have users starting to use it, now we're starting to iterate, reprioritize what we thought was important. But yeah, so that's been a fun experience.
Okay, so you're saying living under constraints has been a fun experience.
Yeah, it has, because then you can trust me, there's still plenty of decisions and work to do. And so all this does is say, well, we can't really. So I'll give you kind of two different. So a business constraint, they define the charge metric. You have to, for this type of product, you have to charge based on the number of Jira users you have in your Jira instance. Well, if I only have 5 people using the product, but I have 1,000 people in Jira, doesn't matter if that's how it's charged. So instead of us debating for 6 months what the right charge metric for this product is, we're constrained, move on to the next battle. On the technical side, should we use React? Should we use Angular? Should we use something else? We're using the Forge platform. They already have all of the frameworks and components. We just pull them off the shelf, point them at the right API, and move forward. So we have to have this platform technology debate. And so constraints do, I think, allow us to move faster in some ways, and at the beginning stage and focus conversations. It will constrain us in other ways long term that we may not like, and we may have to go push additional effort as we grow the product. Let's fast forward 3-5 years, and we say, hey, we really want to take this thing out of that. Well, what does that mean? How do we rebuild this? Do we have to build a whole new separate product? And so that does create long-term concerns. But I would argue that generally speaking, constraints can actually accelerate, particularly in the early stage, and help you move your business forward. I've been in part of companies where we've spent over a year debating about Angular versus React for our front end team instead of building.
So it's not that much limiting, rather that you save yourself from the time you need to invest to make a choice, right? Because if you chose React instead, you will still be constrained by React, right? Kind of like whatever you choose, you are constrained. Now, sometimes more, sometimes less, but there are always constraints. Just the question of how much time you spend choosing the right one, right? And then in that sense, you save your time on that front, right? But if you made a different choice, it's not that you're going to spend a year writing it in React and then say, oh, Angular would be better. Let's rewrite it.
Yeah, well, you write it in Angular 1, and then you realize you have to completely rewrite it for Angular 2, and then rewrite it again for Angular 3, and then you say, well, we should have chose React. And
I just realized that I used JS as example, not a good example. Okay.
No, that's why it's a great example. Actually, I think it's we talk about hiring skill sets, right? We got these here, we've got that there. What's your bet? Because your point is 100% correct. There's constraints always, and the question is, where should you spend your energy as a product team? And this is another kind of soapbox of mine, if you'll allow me for a second. A lot of times, I look at the work that my teams are doing, and I have to challenge them and say, "Hey, are you really creating something new here? Or does this already exist? And is it good enough off the shelf that we can pull and use something and build on top of it so that your time is spent creating the thing that doesn't exist versus re-implementing a new charting library or a new queuing service or version control? Somehow in this market, custom version control systems are everywhere, and that feels like, and again, and there's always reasons why everybody did their custom thing, but I really challenge my teams: how can you make sure that your time is best spent creating the thing that doesn't exist? Because I believe that drives the most business value, but it's also scary, right? It's one thing to say, okay, I know this problem has been solved before, I'm going to solve it my way, I'm going to own it, I'm going to make my little tweak. That's a safe place to be. Saying this problem hasn't been solved or this is new, we don't know if this is possible. And then you've got the evil product managers beating on you for estimates and time lanes, and that creates a different dynamic that makes developers not feel comfortable a lot of times in that other space of building something new that doesn't exist.
But I have a feeling that that's a trap where most engineers fall, including myself, right? It's so easy to underestimate something and say, I can do it better than that. I can write in 50 minutes curl equivalent. As simple as possible, right? And then you realize actually what curl does.
Yeah. It's just getting a URL, right? It's not doing anything fancy. Oh, wait. It handles this scenario and that exception. And it's all these parameters that I can do all the, yeah.
So we've bashed on the JavaScript people for just a moment. What about backend? Because we can always, it's always easy to bash on JavaScript because there's a new framework every 5 seconds.
Maybe backend is JavaScript as well.
Okay, that's the question. What is the backend that y'all are choosing on these newer platforms? Now, obviously, with Atlassian, you're constrained, thankfully.
Correct. Yep.
But let's talk about something that's not that Forge product.
I wish there was a simple answer on this again, where we say, this is the one true way to build these things. The reality,
by the way, the answer to that is Java.
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah. So we've got a lot of Java, we've got a lot of .NET. We've got, so one thing to understand about Tricentis is we've acquired several different businesses, right? And I don't want to get too much into the details here, but and each of those businesses and companies had a different language choice, right? And some were .NET, some were Java. We acquired companies that build a lot of Python, and they're connecting to backend more cloud native services as much as possible. And so we get the entire spectrum. And so I hate to say the answer depends, but it goes actually back to what I was saying earlier, which is, are you building scratch? Are you building on top of the existing product or platform, to use that word very loosely? And so depending on where the product needs to go, and typically we get a lot of momentum where you have existing teams with existing skill sets. Developers are not fungible, and as much as we would say a lot of people are, oh, hey, it's you're a better developer the more languages that you're familiar with. That's not the reality. The reality is you tend to have developers in one camp or another, and they tend to be more productive in those languages, and that actually does constrain. So let's talk about what you said earlier about, okay, here's my business case. Oh, great, we spent a bunch of time getting approved. Now we need to hire, or we can reassess. The business layer doesn't care about the technology choice unless it overly constrains.
Time out. The business does not care about the technology constraints. That needs to be a t-shirt that you wear around the office every time you see your technical people. Because I'm one of those, and my initial reaction as a technologist is, give me a break. But then I put on my business hat, it's like, yeah, they don't care. As long it is the cash flow, if I'm using Stripe or something else, is the cash flow going positive every day? That's the only thing I care about, because that's what would be, coming back to the technologist, that's where I get my paycheck.
Right. That's our job as technology leaders, is to make decisions that allow us to have the biggest business impact. And that could be time. So I could say, hey, we use this technology stack. My board could care less about which technology stack I'm using anywhere, unless it becomes a problem. I say, oh, well, we made this really bad decision 3 years ago and now we're stuck. Well, that sounds like you should be fired because you made a bad decision. But ultimately, they're not going to, they don't care. It's about how we move fast. We start to care about where can we hire, how can we accelerate growth, right? If we in a diligence example, we'll go back to that a little bit. We acquire a company and we say, what tech stack we use. We look at that and we identify that as risk. Oh, nobody else in the company knows that tech stack. Okay, they're using Go. Great, awesome. New technology, everybody wants to play with it. They're actually using it in production. That's their thing. Does anybody really know it as well enough to pick this up in case the team leaves or we need to reallocate that team? So it gets kind of listed in the risk section, but as far as, hey, we're going to build this new product. Oh, is it going to be, using Postgres? Is it going to be using SQL? I don't care. Like, what's the thing you need to solve your problem? Pick the right solution. And you know what? In the future, you're going to come with me in 18 months and tell me we need a change because the price is going too high for Snowflake, and we need to get off something cheaper, or we can't accomplish the speed that we want because it's grown a lot faster than we expected in the database, and we need to move to something else. And if we switch a technology stack, it'll be faster than. And refactor this component, we can deliver these results faster. That's really what it's going to come down to, and why anybody outside of that R&D team is even going to hear those words, but they really don't care. Everybody's eyes start to glaze over when you get into those details, frankly.
You mentioned earlier at the very beginning how one of the most important things for you when we were talking about hiring is you need to trust the leaders that are below you, and I guess that trickles down all the way to the bottom, right? How much trust you can put in people making decisions that are outside of their main competency, right? So you have a new application. Maybe the team wants to write it in Rust, but it's more a hunch, right? Kind of.
Yeah.
Nobody there has 7 years of experience in Rust, and I'm using Rust as an example, right?
Right.
How do you balance that?
Yeah.
Right, because it's not always really fully baked decision. At least when a change is in question, right? You don't really know everything that will happen if you change to Rust.
It's about outcomes. Let's say one of my teams tells me, hey, we're going to use Rust for this project. Cool, great. This is the expectations. Tell me. And we think we can accomplish X in 1 month and Y in month 2 and Z in month 3. Great. Month 1 goes by. They haven't accomplished X yet. Oh, shoot. We didn't realize that these frameworks or libraries weren't going to be able to work in this specific scenario, or this feature was more experimental. We thought it was more baked, or we're using it in a way that was not designed to be built that way. Okay, so you've lost a month, which let's just say it's a team of 5 people for arbitrary sake. Okay, you lost a team of 5 a month. Did they learn something in that month? Right? Did they refine the requirements? Did they think through some of the ideas such that by the end of month 3, they've actually caught back up because through prototyping and building, they've learned? That's fine, but not a big deal. Have they lost a month and now in month 2, they want to switch to a language and they have the same thing. And then month 3, they want to switch to another language. That team leader no longer has my trust. And so I hate to say, give people the space to fail. You need to give people the space to fail, of course, but there's business consequences there. And this is something that's hard for a lot of managers and even harder, I think, for a lot of individual contributors and developers. If you're given that opportunity, the best thing you can do is, as quickly as possible, identify whether or not what you think was going to happen is happening. So again, using these arbitrary months, a week goes by. Wow, we're totally behind. I would rather that developer come to me and say, I know we made this decision. We made a big deal about wanting to go use Rust, and you said we could go do it. It's not going to work. The faster that time is, you tell me after a week, no worries. You tell me 3 months later after you've been cycling, and the whole time you're telling me, we're good. We're a little behind, but we're going to catch up. And all the reports and other data, and maybe I'm starting to see some cooking show level shenanigans that make it look like things are moving forward, and then they're not there. That's where I lose trust. And to be perfectly honest, then we probably have to have a conversation about whether or not you need to be let go or move on. And so the best way to solve that is to communicate clearly and regularly, and have that honest self-assessment. I'll pick on you, Victor. So you're telling me you're using Rust and you're excited about it and you're optimistic. I'm going to get this. Last week was a bad week. This week I'm going to double down. I'm going to figure it out. I'm almost there. I almost got it. Another week goes by. I almost got it. And a month goes by, and if you can't pull yourself out and kind of assess, that's a problem. And either you shouldn't be in that leadership role where you're kind of driving that for the other team. If you're that team lead, if you're that individual contributor, then I think you really need to be trying to figure out, what were you trying to accomplish? Were you trying to prove that you could do it, or were you trying to move the business forward, do the job? And I have seen in cases where people are trying to build their own skill sets, frankly, change jobs or do something else, but like, what's the real motivation there? And look, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about understanding the environment you're in and wanting to be there. If you don't want to be there, that's okay. like there's plenty of, we're fortunate. And I always say this, we're fortunate we're in an industry. I'm in this industry not because there's a lot of opportunity and growth and jobs and pays well. I just enjoy the technology and I enjoy the industry. So I'm fortunate because of that. There's other jobs out there. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, find a new one. Don't waste your time and the people that you work with, your team's time, just kind of messing around. We all need a little bit of a break, but anyways, that's my soapbox on the management layer. That I don't know if,
but I feel it fails that very often in some organizations it goes both way. Kind of like you need to give people that space to come and say,
True.
I messed up, and you say it's okay.
Yes. And that you need that safe space. And I've seen a lot of organizations where that doesn't exist, and you see why, and you're like, yeah, I wouldn't say that either. And it is 100% both ways. But I've also seen it takes a long time to change that culture. And I've seen other things where you come in and that those decisions are dictated down to the individual team members, and they don't feel like they have that autonomy and that flexibility, and they can't make good decisions. And so the reality is, it is hard. It's easy to talk about it on a podcast. It's hard in reality. It goes both ways. Sometimes, it's heavy one direction or the other. So I'm not trying to blame the evil developers that are wasting company time. You're right, Victor. It goes both ways.
So people have been listening. We've talked about Tricentis. You've got a little app inside the Atlassian marketplace, but there's a lot more to Tricentis. So if people aren't familiar with Tricentis, what is it that you'll do?
Yeah, for sure. That is probably our smallest product that we have from a customer and revenue perspective. When people think about Tricentis, they generally think about enterprise end-to-end test automation. What does that mean? That means I have a large, complex app that spreads departments. It spreads from kind of modern web stacks to back-end mainframes, and I need to ensure that end-to-end process across all of these various systems is tested and validated as we do updates and upgrades. So when most people think of Tricentis, that's kind of where we were founded, where we came from. And it's really around that test automation scenario. A lot of people are saying, hey, we've got a lot of manual testers, and there are still a massive number of manual testers in the world. And we want to go faster. We want to move to a more continuous delivery model. You can't have a 2-week test cycle if you're doing continuous integration and continuous delivery. Great, here's some automation. We'll help you scale that app. And without getting into too much details of kind of the founding, that functional test automation is really where Tricentis started. And then from there, we expanded into test management with a merger of a company called QA Symphony that's out of Atlanta. Tricentis was founded out of Vienna in Austria. And then test management. So we got functional test automation. Now we've expanded to test management with QA Symphony. And then more recently merged with a company called Neotis out of France that does performance load testing. Right. So we got test automation, test management, performance testing. So all this quality story, this is the legacy and where Tricentis has been. And the thing that we're trying to expand and cover more now is not just these larger enterprise where they've got 100 or 1,000 agile teams that are, and apologize for saying the A word, that are trying to transform and use more automation. But there's other types of developers and other product teams out there that are, again, building cloud native applications that are trying to use more modern infrastructure, that are already operating and delivering multiple times a day, what are the tools that they need to be successful? And so that's where Tricentis goes in the future. And about a year ago, we acquired a company based in Israel called Testum, and that's solving some similar types of problems, but for a different persona, for a different buyer, for somebody that's more interested in progression testing, whereas a lot of the kind of core Tricentis products are more focused on regression testing. Did I break anything, right? And our expanded focus when we're adding a lot of capabilities is progression. How can I move fast and build new capabilities and make sure that they're working as expected? Usually this audience has a higher tolerance for some pain and some disruption, but there's still a limit. Whereas our core businesses are more, transportation, pharmaceutical, financial, and that regression testing has real impact every day. And so it's super important that they get it all right. Whereas the other folks are moving fast, breaking things, that mantra. And so that's where Tricentis is going in the future.
One last question, and I asked this of our guest last week. Do you use Tricentis to build Tricentis and make sure that everything's working fine on Tricentis?
Great question. The short answer is yes. The more complex answer is not as much as we want to. So today, several of our product teams use our products for functional test automation. We don't have 100% automated test coverage though, for a lot of our products, which you would be surprised to hear from a company like ours. And some we're using, typically that product team is using their product primarily, and we've started to use some of the other products. The interesting thing is because of who our target buyer is, in addition to the engineering teams, it's also a lot of the IT folks. And so we use ServiceNow, we use Salesforce, and we use some of our product offerings to help test those, but not nearly. It's not embedded in the process with the teams and how they're building and how they're operating daily. And so we literally have a working group that is prioritizing, all the different functional teams, our web and marketing teams, our IT departments, and saying, how can we be the ideal case study for our own products? So we are, but not as great as we think we could be.
You're working within your constraints right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes actually there are obvious downsides of not the whole organization using its own tools, right? But sometimes there are upsides because that can be an indication, kind of. So why? Right? Kind of, why did you choose to go down a different route than what somebody else on the floor above you built, right?
Yeah. And you learn a lot in those conversations, right? I don't want to force people to use the products because they're part of ours. I want them to use them because of their best solutions. And those are the conversations that drive the best improvement. So we talked earlier about talking to customers and users. Those users can be a floor above or below you. They don't have to be outside. Don't be afraid to talk to some of the other departments and ask them, why don't you like this? Why aren't you using this? I noticed you're using this other thing, or would you use this, right?
So all of Mav's contact information is going to be down in the show notes. Mav, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you all very much. It was a fun conversation.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.